Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine, growing up the son of a key figure.
Right.
Deeply embedded in one side of this really intense, long-standing conflict.
Yeah. Your whole world is just shaped by that struggle, those loyalties.
Exactly. And then the almost unbelievable happens.
Mm-hmm.
You end up becoming a spy for the other side.
Yeah.
The perceived enemy.
But wait, that's not even the full story, is it? Because somewhere in that double life, something completely unexpected happens. A huge personal, spiritual transformation.
That's the extraordinary journey we're diving into today.
It's a narrative that really bridges these worlds that seem, well, impossible to reconcile.
Yeah.
You've got Palestinian and Israeli, Muslim and Christian.
The son of a leader and an intelligence asset. It's a story pulled right from the heart of the conflict, full of deep personal struggle, surprising turns.
Absolutely. And this deep dive, it's specifically into excerpts from the book Sonofhamas by Mosab Hassan Yousef with Ron Bracken.
Right. So this isn't like a comprehensive historical analysis. It's very much a personal account. His recollections woven together. Someone who lived right there, at the center of it all.
It gives us historical context, but through his unique lens. Powerful personal stories, insights into the various groups, the leaders involved.
And our mission here is really just to go through these excerpts, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the insights from this truly extraordinary narrative, just as it's presented in the source material.
Yeah, we want to help you grasp the complexities, understand the human stories behind it all, and see the surprising shifts revealed in this text without getting, bogged down by absolutely everything.
And just to be really clear up front, our role here is to look impartially at the information contained within this specific source.
Right.
We're here to understand the author's stated experiences, his perspectives, reporting what's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
We're not endorsing any particular political viewpoint mentioned in it.
Definitely. So let's jump right in then, set the scene a bit.
Okay. So the author, Mosab, he was born in Ramallah in the West Bank. His father was Sheikh Hassan Yousef, who, he became a globally recognized figure.
But the story, it actually stretches back even further. Starts with his grandfather, Sheikh Yousuf Dawood. He was the village imam in Al-Jania, which the book describes as this peaceful village near Ramallah.
Yeah, the source kind of paints this picture of a quiet rural life nestled in the hills there.
And from there, it broadens out a bit, touches on the bigger historical context mentioned in the book, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and then the rise of movements like the Muslim Brotherhood, founded by Hassan al-Banna back in Cairo.
And the author introduces this concept, as he saw it, of two different sides within Islam.
Right. He talks about the caring, charitable side, looking after the poor, strengthening communities.
But also this other side, the one calling for jihad to establish a global caliphate.
And his father, Hassan Yousef, he comes back from studying in Jordan and working with Ibrahim Abu Salem, really starts to revitalize the Muslim Brotherhood's presence in Palestine.
The book describes his father's character as, deeply devoted, compassionate, incredibly hardworking for Allah.
And genuinely well-liked, apparently. Lived a simple life, just like the people he served.
It's really against this backdrop that Mosab's own childhood unfolds. And it's deeply shaped by this escalating political, religious landscape, especially as the First Intifada starts to brew.
That's right. He shares these childhood perceptions that were just profoundly influenced by his environment. Like, take the cemetery near his house.
Oh yeah, that part was vivid.
He describes the Islamic burial practices, the imam's frankly terrifying accounts of potential torture after death, ribs being crushed, the snake with 99 heads, things like that.
Initially, he says he was so scared he'd actually go back to listen for sounds of suffering. But over time, almost unbelievably, that same cemetery, it became his playground.
That shift, right, from terror to familiarity, even play in a place tied to death and judgment. And it's quite a powerful image from the source.
It really is. And he describes the atmosphere when the First Intifada kicked off in 87. He notes this intense internal debate going on within the Muslim Brotherhood.
About whether to embrace violence or stick to a nonviolent path. Yeah.
And he specifically mentions his father being present at a secret meeting in Hebron back in 1986, where Hamas was actually formed from within the Brotherhood.
And his own personal involvement started young, throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers.
He captures that feeling, doesn't he? The exhilaration of challenging the military, even with just stones.
But also the flip side, his mother's intense worry when he didn't come home after one incident, frantically searching for him.
The source paints a really clear picture of the challenges living under occupation during that time. Palestinians largely lacked modern weapons.
Right, mostly stones, Molotov cocktails, that kind of thing. There were reports of children being injured, and these really strict curfews were enforced. The book mentions a shoot-on-sight policy if you were caught out on the street.
It sounds like such a chaotic, confusing time. The book talks about masked men appearing.
Yeah, and the constant fear of Israeli soldiers infiltrating, disguising themselves as fighters, and that ever-present dread of being wrongly labeled a collaborator.
Which could easily get you killed.
Exactly.
The book also touches briefly on some broader political history, just through the author's eyes. He mentions the PLO's power base in Jordan.
King Hussein's secret alliance with Israel, apparently. And then the PLO's violent expulsion from Jordan during Black September in 1970, that was a major conflict.
Which led them to move first to Lebanon, then Tunisia, all while, he says, continuing to build up their fighters.
And this period also brought huge struggles for his own family. Hardship, mainly because his father was so involved and, well, frequently arrested.
Right. The source says his father was arrested a staggering 13 times.
13 times. You can just imagine the burden on his mother. Left to raise 6 children alone, often facing really severe financial problems.
He shares that really poignant detail, doesn't he? About his mother having to walk these long distances just for groceries.
And the shame she felt. Having to pick up broken, sometimes rotting vegetables from under the market carts. Pretending it was for their animals just to save face.
God, that's tough. And then there's that story about his uncle seeing him selling pastries on the street.
The uncle was embarrassed, bought all the pastries. But later, apparently just unleashed his fury on the mother, left her in tears.
It shows so much about the complex dynamics, the lack of straightforward support sometimes, even within the extended family or community.
And just the difficulty the family faced, trying to even find out where the father was when he was imprisoned. The source describes them searching for 3 months once before they even located him in a special interrogation facility.
Wow. Okay, so all of this really brings us to a major turning point in the narrative. The author's own first arrest, which was in 1996.
Right. He describes being captured, beaten up, taken to the Mascobia detention center. His description is just grim.
Yeah, small, foul-smelling cell, hot, moldy bugs, and a broken toilet flooding the place.
Ugh. And he recounts the torture experience there. Specifically mentions the loud music they blasted constantly, like Leonard Cohen's First We Take Manhattan.
He was determined not to cry, he writes, trying to be strong like his father. But he couldn't help but see and hear the suffering of the other prisoners around him.
And then comes the pivotal moment. The Shin Bet captain, a guy named Loai, makes him an offer. Work for us.
Because the Shin Bet initially suspected him, right, of being connected to Al-Qassam, Hamas's military wing, because he'd been caught trying to buy weapons.
Exactly. And the author describes this intense internal struggle he went through, but ultimately he decides to accept Loai's offer.
And here's a really powerful insight from the source. One of his key reasons, he states, was that he'd seen the Israelis treat him, despite everything, with a degree of humanity.
Yeah, that surprising encounter, he says, started making him question his own path of revenge. It planted a seed, this desire to maybe stop the violence somehow.
His time after that, in Megiddo prison, where he was known as a collaborator, he actually describes it feeling almost like a 5-star prison compared to Mascobia.
Relatively speaking, I guess. But still, it was a world of deep mistrust. Informants everywhere, known as birds.
He mentions a weird incident, too, where a sick prisoner was swapped through a cut in the fence during a head count. Very mysterious. And just the constant disturbing sounds of suffering he could hear.
He also gives his take on a prison riot at Megiddo, describing it as stemming from what he saw as, well, silly and pointless demands by Hamas prisoners, which led to harsh consequences, gas, fires burning down tents.
When he was released in 1997, his mother welcomed him home like a hero. She saw prison as this kind of rite of passage, apparently, completely unaware of the depth of his experiences or, his new arrangement with the Shin Bet.
Right. And he also mentions failing his high school exams, interestingly, even though he'd somehow gotten the answers beforehand. He believed, he writes, that Allah didn't want him to pass by cheating.
So this really marks the start of his incredibly complex double life. And it kicked off a profound shift in his worldview.
Yeah, after his release, he starts meeting regularly with his Shin Bet handlers. Secret locations, feeling like a spy, navigating this clandestine world.
But these interactions, according to the book, began to change him in really fundamental ways.
He writes about learning about concepts like justice and security from them, feeling respected, actually built up in a way he hadn't expected.
And pretty surprisingly, he realized that his ingrained desire to kill Israelis was starting to fade.
And here's another significant takeaway from his account. He contrasts this respectful, logical perspective he felt he got from the Shin Bet with some of his experiences within his own society, even his own family sometimes.
Yeah, he cites things like his uncle's hypocrisy, that shocking knife attack from a neighbor he mentions, and just the limitations he felt his father faced in teaching him certain things about life because he was in prison so often.
And this internal shift then takes a spiritual turn. In 1999, near the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, he bumps into a man from the UK.
Right, who invites him to a Christian Bible study at the YMCA. He remembers his friend Jamal warning him, "That's extremely dangerous."
But he went anyway, and he describes reading the Bible and the profound impact Jesus' teachings had on him, especially the commands to love your enemies and not judge others.
He vividly contrasts this, doesn't he, with what he perceived as the judgmental aspects of the Arab society and the Islam he'd known. Thinking, wow, what wisdom this man had.
Yeah.
It just opened up a totally new perspective for him.
And amidst all this growing confusion, this internal conflict, he recounts this moment where he just prayed directly. He says something like, "God, the Creator, show me the truth. I'm confused. I'm lost."
He was actively seeking something beyond the cycles of hatred he'd grown up in.
Which leads us right into the period of the Second Intifada, the Al-Aqsa Intifada, which erupted around the year 2000.
Now, the source notes that Hamas was actually quite weakened at this point. The Palestinian Authority, the PA, was largely in control.
And the author shares his perspective on Yasser Arafat's role during this time. He expresses his belief, quite strongly in the book, that Arafat refused the Camp David peace offer.
A major U.S. brokered proposal.
Yeah, because he actually wanted Palestinians bleeding on the streets, basically for political leverage.
Yeah.
He saw Arafat as manipulative, publicly condemning Hamas, but privately cooperating. He believed Arafat played a key role in orchestrating this new intifada.
He even mentions, doesn't he, that the PA wanted his father to revitalize Hamas.
Exactly. So they could then position themselves to suppress it again. Some Hamas leaders apparently warned his father about Arafat's real intentions.
The trigger for the Intifada, as described in the book, was Ariel Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, and the violence quickly escalated from stone throwing back to widespread gunfire.
And the author describes this period as reaching the day of decision for him personally. He resolved to work even more intensely with the Shin Bet. He felt he had to try and stop what he saw as this escalating madness.
And it's here that his Shin Bet codename is revealed, the Green Prince.
Right. Green for the Hamas flag color, and Prince referring to his father's status within the movement.
What's really striking, as highlighted in the book, is his unique position. He was essentially the only Hamas insider working for the Shin Bet.
Unparalleled access, Hamas, the PA, other factions. He even got reports on Arafat's own meetings, apparently. He writes that he felt a sense that God was somehow with him in this incredibly unique, dangerous role.
So being an insider during this incredibly intense period meant learning about the plans of figures like Marwan Barghouti, other Hamas leaders.
And feeding that crucial information back to the Shin Bet.
He recounts feeling genuinely sickened when he saw Palestinian leaders visiting hospitals after attacks. From his perspective, his belief was that they'd intentionally led people into dangerous situations and then just watched the carnage from afar.
There's a really challenging conversation he describes having with his father, asking him about sending children to die.
Yeah, and his father's reply, according to the book, was that the children wanted to go, told him to look at his own brothers.
And that interaction, he says, solidified his personal resolve to protect his younger siblings, whatever it took.
The source also mentions his day job at the time, working for USAA on U.S.-funded water projects.
Right, which brought him face-to-face with that complex relationship Palestinians had with the U.S., receiving aid for basic infrastructure.
While also knowing the U.S. provided weapons to Israel. The book highlights the contentious issue of water control, too, mentioning the Sea of Galilee, Israel's national water carrier, as major points of conflict.
Working with the Shin Bet obviously brought huge moral dilemmas. He describes one instance where they demanded he help assassinate Halawa, a terrorist responsible for killings.
But here's another crucial insight from his story. The author absolutely refused. He wouldn't participate in any killing, insisting they pursue arrests instead.
Right. He mentions Halawa was eventually killed later in a missile strike anyway, and he also recounts the brutal killing of an orphan boy accused of collaboration right after just illustrating the harsh reality for suspected informants.
The assassination of Abu Ali Mustafa, the PFLP Secretary General, is also mentioned. And the book touches on the impact of 9/11.
Yeah, how it drastically changed the global view of terrorism and influenced Israeli and U.S. intelligence approaches. The author notes Israel's long-standing reliance on human intelligence, contrasting it with what he saw as the U.S. focus on tech before 9/11.
This leads us into a period the author actually labels the game. It involved staged arrests and, alongside that, a deepening internal transformation for him.
Right, to bolster his cover, make him seem more dangerous to his own people, the Shin Bet decided to stage his capture. He calls it Act 2 of the play.
He recounts this dramatic staged raid on his house. He narrowly escapes. The IDF shoots up and damages his bedroom.
His family gets questioned, and he successfully ends up on the most wanted list, which, from the perspective of his cover, was a success.
The source mentions the Park Hotel bombing in 2002, a horrific Hamas attack during Passover Seder, and it notes a potential peace offer from the Arab League that followed.
Yeah, proposing to recognize Israel if certain conditions were met. But the author believes Hamas's all-or-nothing idealism, as he puts it, prevented them from even considering this potentially transformative offer.
During Operation Defensive Shield, that large-scale Israeli military operation, the author describes watching the violence, which he saw as indiscriminate on both sides, and also realizing that the Israeli soldiers were often scared too.
He details the CIA-backed PA compound attack where buildings were blown up. He recounts a mix-up identifying prisoners after everyone was ordered to strip naked.
And how Jabril Rajoub, the PA security chief, ended up losing power after the Shin Bet pressured him to identify wanted men among the prisoners.
And there's that incredible, almost unbelievable story he shares about his father's narrow escape.
Oh yeah, when the IDF soldiers randomly decided to rest in the very house where his father was hiding in the basement, completely unaware.
And they just left without finding him. Pure chance, it seems.
So in September 2002, another decision was made. Stated the author's second arrest. But this time his father was arrested too, in the same raid.
The stated purpose, according to the book, was twofold. Provide cover for both of them, and allow the author a kind of rest period inside prison.
He describes his experience during this particular imprisonment, being cuffed for hours, but he notes his father was treated respectfully by the Israelis while they were detained together.
But crucially, his time here marked a really significant internal experience for him. He somehow got hold of a Bible and started studying scripture intensely.
And what he found surprising as he writes it was that he felt no bitterness towards his previous torturers or interrogators.
Yeah, this is a powerful insight he shares. He attributes this lack of bitterness to the words of Jesus feeling alive and active within him. He felt it enabled him to see people as humans, not just enemies, displacing his old hatred with this new kind of love he didn't fully get at the time.
He also spent time in Kitsia prison, describes it as this harsh wilderness environment, wild animals, extreme cold, extreme heat, really primitive conditions.
But it was there, he says, he read intensely, memorized thousands of English words, witnessed uprisings, and felt God's presence very strongly. He writes about learning to love God the Father during that period.
Which brings us towards the end game of his double life and his eventual departure from the region.
Right. After his release from Kitsiat, the source mentions the arrest and sentencing of Abdullah Barghouti, that prolific bomb maker, highlighting his chilling lack of remorse at his sentencing.
There's also a really poignant account of the capture and killing of Salah, who was both his friend and a bomb maker.
The author expresses real heartbreak over Salah's death, and contrasts it with the subsequent poverty faced by Salah's wife. He touches on his father's lack of immediate financial help too, noting, Salah's wife wasn't the only one struggling. He expresses deep frustration with the systemic issues, this cycle of violence and poverty.
In 2004, his father was released from prison. And he made a very significant gesture, didn't he? Visiting Yasser Arafat's grave first.
Yeah, which was widely seen as a signal intended to prevent civil war between Hamas and Fatah after Arafat had passed away.
The author recounts how a hunch of his, a suspicion he shared with Shin Bet, eventually led to the discovery and capture of Aziz Cade,
whom he came to believe was the real hidden leader of Hamas, a discovery that apparently even surprised his Shin Bet handlers.
He discusses Hamas's controversial decision to participate in the 2000 elections and his father's doubts expressed in the book about whether they were actually ready to govern.
Right, feeling it would require uncomfortable compromise, cooperation with Israel, things Hamas wasn't prepared for.
And at this point, the author expresses significant personal frustration. Just tired of the corruption he saw, the cruelty, the endless violence, the constant risk the pretense of his own life.
He longed for something normal, even considered just starting a simple computer business, getting away from it all.
He mentions his baptism in 2005, which he did despite warnings from the Shin Bet about the danger it posed to his cover.
He felt, as he writes, that God was changing him too much internally to hold back any longer.
The 2006 elections brought more intense drama. His father initially decided not to run, communicating this decision through the author.
Hamas leaders panicked, apparently. The author received a death threat as a result, and his father then reversed his decision specifically for the author's safety.
And then went on to win the election from prison.
Incredible. So the author describes his final decision to quit his work with the Shin Bet, telling Loai, his handler, that he was done.
Yeah, he felt tired of fighting what seemed like an unwinnable war, trying to fight ideas with force. His words from the book are striking. He felt like they were all just rats trapped in a maze.
This led to a difficult negotiation for him to leave the reader to go to the United States. The Shin Bet were understandably reluctant to let such a valuable asset just walk away.
They imposed conditions. It took about 6 months, he says, of back and forth before they finally allowed him to leave.
The source recounts that emotional moment, telling his mother he was leaving literally on the morning of his departure.
Her quiet worry, her simple desire for him to find peace, all while being completely unaware of the full, constant danger he'd been living under for all those years.
Finally, he describes his journey across the Allenby Bridge into Jordan and his eventual arrival in the U.S., leaving behind this whole world he had known and secretly navigated for so long.
So just to recap the incredible journey we've explored, based purely on these excerpts, we've seen this path from being the son of a prominent leader,
right through the absolute heart of the conflict,
becoming an insider for the perceived enemy, navigating extreme danger, profound moral dilemmas,
and somehow finding a completely new perspective, a new faith, right in the middle of it all.
It's a powerful reminder, drawn from this personal account, of the immense human cost of conflict, the deep complexities often hidden beneath the headlines,
and the astonishing possibility of individual change, of moral choice, even in the most extreme, seemingly impossible circumstances.
And this journey, it really leaves us with a powerful question, one the author seems to grapple with throughout the source material, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of poses it to all of us. As long as we keep searching for the enemy anywhere other than inside ourselves, will there always be conflict?
His experience seems to suggest that religion, or ideology, without that genuine internal transformation, well, it can easily lead to self-righteousness and just perpetuate these cycles of hurt and oppression.
It certainly leaves you with something significant to consider about the nature of conflict, the search for truth, and where the real battleground for change might truly lie.